So, Louise.
Hi.
What's your experience with the coronavirus pandemic?
I think it's hard to put into words just how crazy this past year has been for all of us. You know, no one knew where life was headed. And for key workers like myself, it's not only been a crazy year, but a long year. I think fear was the overwhelming feeling at first, but we all adapted quickly and learned that you can't just live in a constant state of anxiety. I remember the first day when things began to change at work. We were asked to wear masks and clinical gowns when working at the nursing home. One thing that struck me wasn't how we as workers reacted, but how the residents reacted to us. You know, some of them with dementia, they didn't really understand what was going on. We had to keep explaining to them why we were dressed the way we were and why we had new systems in place. I can't particularly imagine the feeling they had during this time. Not only that, but when I went home, I had to be careful around my family. I didn't want to infect anyone or catch anything from home and take it back to the residents. I recall one day, probably around 2 months into the pandemic, we had a confirmed COVID case. Within the week, we had 14 residents test positive, and 10 of those didn't make it. I think that was probably one of the hardest few days.
Is this angle good?
Perfect.
And make sure the light's hitting right on my face.
Of course.
Okay, you can begin.
How has the pandemic affected you?
It's been horrendous. My career, gone. I haven't booked a job in months. Like, my cuticles, they haven't been professionally done in over a year. Mainly because I haven't been able to afford it, because I've booked no jobs. My last job before the pandemic was as an ensemble cast member in a local production of The Trees Are Falling. As I always say, the ensemble is the most important part of the show. We're the ones that really bring the whole cast together. When the pandemic hit, the government gave no funding, and we were all told to retain new jobs. But me, I persevered. I know I have star quality and a pandemic was not going to stop me. I got a job as a retail worker. The way they checked me was appalling. I wanted to work on tills, but they put me on stacking shelves. Like, the actual audacity. I left after 2 weeks. After that, I decided to look for acting courses in my local area. I just thought I'd use my time to perfect my skills ready for when the pandemic is over and I can get my career back on track. That's how I ended up here. In all seriousness though, the government just didn't do much, and we were all worried that the government wouldn't give us any funding. Like bartenders, chefs, teachers, retail workers, they've all got guaranteed jobs to go back to one day. But for actors like myself, we don't know when we'll work again. We'll all pull through though. It's all uphill from here. Was that good?
Yeah, thanks, Millie.
Are you able to send me the footage just to make sure I look alright?
Sure.
Awesome. I have to go, places to be, things to do.
I recall one day, probably around 2 months into the pandemic, we had a confirmed COVID case. Within the week, we had 14 residents test positive. 10 of those didn't make it. I think that was probably one of the hardest few days for me. I remember still going home and pretty much locking myself in my room to stay away from my family. I guess, without it being cliched, it's taught me how precious life is. You know, we just go through life without really paying attention to things, and then it came to COVID and we just had to pause and really think about what was happening. But yeah, I'm hoping for a brighter future for all of us.
Do you have a cough? Do you have maskne? Do you have chapped lips? Do you have dry hands? Do you have cracked skin? Do you have steamed glasses? Then you need the Med-19. Get it now from any illegal chemist. Side effects include vomiting, dizziness, headaches, internal bleeding, brain hemorrhages, and possibly death.
So Jack, what's your experience of the pandemic?
It's not really fazed me. You know, most people are living in fear of catching it, or wondering what would happen if they did catch it. But for me, I just didn't want to feel that way. Like, I go to my mates all the time and try to be as safe as possible, but sometimes we just have to do what's best for our lives. It's not that I don't care about it. Like, both my uncles have had it and I felt proper bad for them. But like, also, I never wanted to feel like I couldn't live my life because of a virus. And I know people will say I'm being selfish, and maybe I am, but that was my choice to make.
Do you not worry about putting others at risk?
I take all the necessary precautions there, and obviously I'm as careful as I can be since I don't want to endanger anyone. I think early on into the pandemic I realised how long this was going to last, and these are meant to be my best years. I just kind of want to live, and I know people don't get that, but like I say, it was a personal choice. And we all have different experiences of the pandemic. And like I say, I know my choices were selfish, but not everyone has the same beliefs. And whilst I believe that this is very real, I try my hardest to just continue on.
So, Sky, the pandemic, how has it changed you?
I don't think it's changed me. You could say it's like changed the way I think. Like, I remember the day that we finished school, and none of us thought it was going to last more than 2 weeks. But you know, here we are, a year later. I think I went home that day and I sat in the garden and just read a book, and when I look back on that day, it was like a weird state of bliss. Just a calm 2 weeks off college. Obviously as time went on we all realised we weren't going back, and we had to adapt to this new way of life. I'm pretty academic, so I find it a lot easier to work at college rather than home. So for me, these past few lockdowns, they've been really difficult, especially when you've got two younger brothers causing a riot around the house.
I met my mates at the park in the first lockdown last year, and we were just chilling, and it was during that time when it was all in the press about how young people are the super spreaders of COVID. This old dude walked past us and started yelling abuse at us about how we were breaking the rules, but there were 6 of us and we were sat at a social distance. I think that was the moment where I was like, screw this, and yeah, it's just a decision I made.
I think my mum probably struggled with this lockdown more. Like, me and my brothers, we could find things to keep us occupied, but I mean, she's been furloughed for almost a year now. And at first, I think she managed to get like loads of stuff done that she's wanting to do for ages. So, like, she sorted all our bedrooms out and went through all the baby pictures and looked through our family tree. And then in the past few months, it's clearly gotten a lot harder for her. And I think the boredom mixed with probably fear of going back to that job that she hasn't had for a year, it's probably getting to her. But I also think it's the same with many people right now, so many people will resonate with that.
If you can take one thing from this pandemic, what would it be?
I think, like with so many people, it's probably the time we've got to spend with my family. So, I mean, before this lockdown, we were never forced to spend time together. It's been kind of cool getting to know them better and understand them more. And I don't know, I hope one day we can look back and take positive aspects from what was a pretty dark time.